2018 question 6. Alright, a part of our module 3 review. It's the last thing. So let's go. Chronic diseases, which are increasing in both incidence and prevalence, are precipitated by lifestyle choices and are having a marked effect on mortality in the Caribbean. Explain this phenomenon, referring to a chronic disease as an example. But mhm, okay, okay, not so bad. Okay, great, lovely, immaculate, even exceptional, right? So yeah, you're welcome. Look at that. You guys try to be like her. Out here setting examples and stuff. All right, so we have that a lovely, lovely. Oh no, okay. But we have that right. So we can define that first, right? What a chronic disease is, right? Um, no, what would be the chronic disease that we want to use? It could be any chronic disease. Obesity, because I could explain that one away. Go ahead. Okay, so let's try obesity. Can be anything. It doesn't matter. Obesity. All right. So obesity is what we're talking about. And we know what obesity is, right? Please be politically correct. We're talking about the chronic, right, or the long-term continued consumption of processed or refined sugars and fats that may lead to an increase in the person's body mass index, right? So looking at that. Go ahead. Repeat. Yeah, so we're trying to be, very very diplomatic, right? So I have that for obesity, right? No, we're saying that it's increasing in incidence and prevalence. What is the difference between incidence and prevalence? Mm-hmm. Beautiful response, right? So incidence is how much persons have the thing, right? And prevalence is how much is a disease found, or what is the frequency of that disease in a population, right, over a specific period of time. So we're looking at both incidence and prevalence, right? So it's are precipitated by lifestyle choices in the Caribbean, right? And are having a marked effect on mortality. No, obesity. So what can we state about Caribbean people or contemporary Caribbean society that leads to the increase in prevalence and incidence of these chronic diseases, for example, obesity? What are we seeing? Right, so we're looking at transnational organizations and fast food branches and stuff like that, and how they can supply all of these unhealthy food into Caribbean society, and Caribbean citizens are consuming more of these foods, right? So if you look at it's a general trend within the data, right? So per children nowadays are more obese than children as they used to be before, right? Obesity is more prevalent in the population because of the increased amount of processed foods that are in the economy, that are in the countries, that are circulating, right? We could also speak to poverty, right? So poverty is a thing that is ramping up in the Caribbean, right? So how does poverty link to this? By the way, if you did food and nutrition, you would destroy this question. All right. Oh wait, go ahead. Let me allow the person to raise their hand. Go ahead. Mhm. 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 Lovely. So if you look at it, the cheaper the food, the more processed and unhealthy the food tends to be. Right? I'm not talking about the particular Caribbean situation that exists where persons may live in rural areas where they can eat natural fruits and stuff like that off of trees. Right? That is not the case for all Caribbean people. We're talking about the overall Caribbean outlook. Right? So we're looking at stuff like that. So more healthy alternatives for foods may be more expensive. And could speak about the economic situation in the Caribbean and how that connects to now the prevalence of these processed foods in the economy or in circulation rather, right? And how this now directly relates to lifestyle choices, right? That go into the disease, right? No, one thing that I could state, right, when I was doing food and nutrition, my food teacher directly said that lifestyle choices as it relates to poverty really and truly isn't much of a choice anymore. Caribbean persons, other persons in different areas in the Caribbean don't have a choice as it relates to this anymore, right? It's what they can afford, and what they can afford is highly processed, right? So that is the case there, right? So we could think about that. Remember, this is an epidemiology question, right? This is not necessarily just a science question. We have to talk about the Caribbean context and the prevalence of these diseases, right? So more persons start to choose these things. More persons start to eat more processed foods, especially carbohydrates. In the Caribbean, we have an issue with carbohydrates, right? We have a huge issue with carbohydrates, right, in the Caribbean. So we tend to eat a lot more carbohydrates, and processed carbohydrates, and then that would lead to now the storing of glycogen and these different things within the body, right, leading to the increase in adipose tissue, right? That will lead into the increased BMI that will lead to the persons being obese. With these questions, I believe that older papers actually allowed tested you on real biology. Because the older papers really weed out who don't know anything from who knows stuff. Alright? But you can see in these questions, if you don't know a lot about the topic, you are failing the question. Right? So you need to read up and understand the intricacies between economics, epidemiology, and biology. Right? And that is where you would get the answer to this question. Are there any real are there any huge questions that we have? Let me check the chat for anybody who said anything. Go ahead. Maybe saying something in Ashka. I thought you were saying something. Oh. But yeah, so these papers, right? I think we should go back to this style of paper, right? It's not gonna happen this year, right? But I think after you guys, it should really go back to this style of paper because this style of paper really assesses whether or not the student knows anything. And nowadays, you can go into a CAPE exam, not really know anything, and come out with a one, right? So, and that is it. So you don't. Mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm. Lovely. So that could be the case. Mm-hmm. So there are many things that you could use to answer the question. Lovely. But remember, we need to really look at chronic disease. We need to define that. We need to know what prevalence is, and we need to know what incidents are. Because when we're discussing and talking about these things, they want to see that the candidate understands what these terms mean. All right. The next part now. Joseph contracts dengue fever and recovers. 3 months later, he goes to another town to take care of his grandmother who is suffering from dengue fever. He decides to take her to the hospital where both his blood and his grandmother's blood are tested. The antibody concentration in Joseph's blood, right, is found to be abnormally high, even though he does not have any symptoms of the disease. Discuss why Joseph's immune response is highlighted, or well, heightened rather, even though he does not appear ill. What is this speaking about? It's talking about this, not true? The graph. That's what it's talking about. It's talking about primary exposure, secondary exposure. So we must be able to speak about this, right? So what are the main things that we will speak about in this? Lovely. But the cool down period, that's the recovery period rather. I should write recovery. Right, so recovery period. We should speak about also secondary exposure. Mm-hmm. Yes, memory cells. Mm-hmm. Is that right? Okay, no problem. All right, lovely, right? So exactly what she stated here. You'll discuss the immune response here, right? So we state in the first sentence here that Joseph contracts dengue and recovers. So that would be the primary response, right? So his body would be blind, basically blindsided by dengue, right? He would battle through it, right? And then after recovery, would know that the antigens are stored in an antigen library, right? Which are the memory T and memory B cells, right? Which also the memory B cells would note the antibody that was used effectively against that antigen, right? Then we see that 3 months later now, right, he is now exposed to the dengue virus again, right? With his when we look at it here, right? So he never explicitly said that he was infected again, right? But he goes to another town where his grandmother is suffering from dengue. So we can now assume that we're speaking about the secondary exposure. The secondary exposure now, right, would be met by a fast, effective, efficient, and strong response, right? Because we already have that antigen library. The body has already seen dengue before. The memory cells are there, the memory B cells are already there producing the antibodies, right? The memory T cells are there all already, right? Assisting with the cell mediated response. So overall, the immune response will be faster, right, and better for the secondary response, right? So the sheer amount of antibodies that will be produced through the humoral pathway, right, would basically handle that entire dengue issue within Joseph, right? Before huge symptoms are very apparent, symptoms arise, right? So we have that there. So when we test Joseph's blood, we see that heightened amount of antibodies, right, or concentration of antibodies there. That's what we see, all right? So go ahead. You're unmuted, The person who said, "Oh my God," is unmuted. So I was like wondering, um, you were saying something. I don't think the person realizes. Oh, okay, okay. Wait, hold on. Who's that? You know what? Hell yeah, that's right. Um, you know what? Yes, it does replace the buses. Look at that. Um, but that is really the end of it. That is really the end of it. That's the long and short of it, guys.